Yo, what's good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Gifted Who's Podcast, episode 61. And I'm joined here today with my guy, Greg. We did our pod last year on Discord. This time we're on playback. He does great work for the Washington Wizards. He also has his own podcast. All of those links will be in the description box below. Greg, say hello to the people for the second time. How's it going, man?
What's up, guys? My name is Greg Finberg. I cover the Washington Wizards for Bullets Forever of SB Nation. I also have a podcast, like Gifted said. It's called the Wizards Podcast. Pretty boring name, but it gets to the point. It's exactly what we talk about. Wizards basketball, once a week, twice a week during the season. I live and die with this team. I don't know why I still do it. It's tough, but I feel like this is the best part of it. It's the tough times that not a lot of people are watching. A lot of people have moved on to the best teams, but this is going to make it that much more rewarding and that much more fun if the Wizards actually do something with this rebuild. So that's where you guys can find me. But I'm excited to be here, excited to talk some Wizards hoops with you.
Yes, I'm hyped because Greg literally is the brand of a fan that I really love, a guy that dies with the ship. Greg rides or dies with, okay? All throughout the season, he was in multiple spaces, tweets, game to game, stretch by stretch. He's one of the most hardworking, locked-in fans of basketball, and this podcast is all about that. So happy to have the convo with Greg. If you missed our last year pod, that'll be in the playlist. Tap into this podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts at Gifted Hoops, and Greg's podcast will also be in the description box below. But let's officially get to things, right? So in our last podcast, you guys offloaded Chris Paul. As a Warriors fan, we gave you Jordan Poole and some draft capital. And coming into the season, it was really about figuring out Jordan Poole's role on the team with Kuzma and how the Washington Wizards would rebound from Beal and Porzingis both being gone. How was 2024 for you as a Wizards fan? Did you see some progress in those areas? And what were your overall first impressions of the first season for Jordan Poole?
2024, it was tough. But I mean, if you're a Wizards fan, this is nothing new, especially if you're a Wizards fan and you're a Commanders fan and you're a Nats fan. Like it's just commonplace. It's what happens. It's kind of surprising when your team is actually good and actually contending for something. So nothing new for me, but obviously it's tough because, the first 18 to 20 games, honestly, 20 to 30, 35 games of the season, you're trotting out Mike Muscala's, you're trotting out Danilo Gallinari's. I mean, guys that, let's face it, if I race them right now, I'm probably quicker than them. You got traffic cones on defense that are pushing up no resistance. Everything's funneled into Daniel Gafford. He can't do everything. And you kind of got this like hodgepodge of a roster that's halfway in the rebuild and halfway just trying to build people up so you can trade them eventually at the deadline. So it's nice to see a guy like Daniel Gafford that has played very well to start last year, but then okay, we're going to trade him, which sucks. And then a guy like Gallinari, he's getting minutes over Patrick Baldwin Jr., who's like 20 years old, who from your Warriors days. There's young guys on this team that aren't playing because these old washed veterans could maybe net a second round pick and you're going to move them. So that's the most frustrating thing, because when you're rebuilding, the only fun and the only joy you get is seeing your young guys develop. And the first half of last season, the Wizards had really none of that. I mean, they were playing a bunch of veterans, a pretty old team when you're starting a rebuild. But that's why I refer to last year as year zero of the rebuild, because I wouldn't even count it as year one. It's going to take a while, but you're starting Danilo Gallinari. He wouldn't even see the floor. He got traded to the Bucks. He didn't see, or to
Absolutely.
the Pistons, signed by the Bucks. Didn't see the floor, and that was your starting four for a couple games. Mike Muscala filled in at center for a couple games. It's just these washed veterans taking minutes from young guys. That was the most frustrating part of the first half of last season. And then you get into the trade deadline. I think this front office has done everything right. I think they failed at last year's trade deadline. The Daniel Gafford move was very great. Happy to see Gaff succeed and go to the finals. And in return, the Wizards get Holmes, the salary filler, get the 26th pick. And because of that, they were able to move up and get Bob Carrington at 14. So that's one of the rare win-win trades where Dallas gets a guy that helps them go to the finals, and the Wizards get off of that guy, but also bring in a young 18-year-old point guard in Carrington because of that deal. But then you look at Tyus Jones, should have been traded. Just no question about it, should have been moved and didn't get traded. There was rumors, multiple second-round picks, some rumors even 4 second-round picks for Tyus Jones. The Wizards didn't take any of it. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But that was one of the more blunders when you get into February. And then once the trade deadline passes, I mean, if you watch, the Wizards went 0-14 in February. It was one of the rougher months, but I can't lie, I felt like I was numb to it because you just go out there and you're surprised if your team wins. That's what happens when you win 15 games out of 82. So again, like that February wasn't like daunting or tough. Like it's what happens when you're rebuilding. So the second half of last year was more fun because you saw guys like Johnny Davis, who really didn't play in the first half, get some minutes. Patrick Baldwin Jr. played a lot towards the end of last season. Coulibaly hurt his wrist, which sucked, but he played a lot more. He was starting into the second half of the season. So it was tough. It sucked 2024, but it's what's going to happen when you're rebuilding. But to talk about Jordan Poole, the jury was like kind of out on him. Even I feel like before he got here, he was great in a 6-man role, but he's never going to be able to do it in a starting role. So the second he started struggling, everybody was just basically like, this guy isn't good. He's never going to cut it as a starter. But they didn't realize the situation he was in. I mean, Wes Unseld Jr., one of the worst coaches, honestly, in the last 4 or 5 years, a nepotism hire from the Wizards. I think he deserved to be in a associate coach role, but there were more qualified candidates at that time. He deploys Jordan Poole like he's Steph Curry, like not really on ball wise, but as if he can just shoot the lights out. He plays him as an off ball guard, running him off down screens and off ball screens, and all he's doing is chucking deep shots that are contested. And that's not what he does. He's a point guard. So then you have Wes fired, you bring in Brian Keefe, and Jordan Poole ascends. And I'm not going to come out here and say that he was all-star level or he was unbelievable. He was good. He averaged 21 and 6 after Wes Unseld Jr. was fired over the last 25 games of last season. 21.6 rebounds. He was shooting around 30 to 31% from three. Got that up to 36% over the last 25 games. Turnovers were down. Shooting numbers were up. And everything was kind of meshing for him. So as much as people want to kind of see him struggle, want to see that he can't really do it unless he's on the Warriors, you got to look at the situation. And I know not a lot, apart from Wizards fans, who's watching this team? Nobody. So I get it. But at the same time, watch a couple games from the beginning of the season and then watch Jordan Poole as a point guard at the end of the season, and you'll see that it was a coaching thing. It wasn't a Jordan Poole thing. It was he's playing out of position. He's forcing shots that he really doesn't get regularly, and then he moves to his actual position, and he's one of the best, if not the best players on the team to end the season. So I'm excited for him. He's going to start again this year. He's going to have every opportunity possible, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. You mentioned Chris Paul. He would have been cut by the Wizards. He would have been bought out. Jordan Poole is free. And I get the contract sucks, $30 million, but the Wizards aren't paying it anytime soon. They have so much cap space. I don't mind eating a bad contract that might turn out to be a very solid player than just sitting there with like $35 million in cap space and doing nothing with it.
Yeah, I got to say, first off, I love all the major points that you were able to hit. I think year one for the Wizards in terms of the rebuild hasn't happened yet. I think this upcoming year is year one. This last year was year zero for me because you traded two of the biggest pieces. Obviously, Beal, who was your overall franchise player, is gone now. So that was all about trying to really pick up the pieces, see what players were, see how good or bad the coach was, which I do agree he was not a great coach. He overplayed a lot of those washed veterans that you're speaking to. And more importantly, in understanding the goals of a rebuild, right? When you're on a team that doesn't win a whole lot of games, you want to win, right? But you're more concerned with the habits, with the reps, with are you playing together? Are you playing, organized basketball at the right way? Do you have a structure to the team, right? I'll give you a prime example, right? Last year, the Houston Rockets did not make the playoffs. They did not make it to the play-in. But in terms of organized, structured basketball, giving themselves a chance, they were in the fight. And I think that's where the Wizards as a franchise are striving to get to. And I think the most annoying part, I would say for me, is watching this team not really go all in on their younger players, giving those guys time. Patrick Baldwin played pretty good spot minutes for the Warriors, and then when he started to get more time towards the end of the season, he shows you some flashes of how good he could be as a rotation player for the Wizards as well. So I feel you on that. Jordan Poole, for me, I think this year is going to be a better role for him. I do agree he was playing out of position a lot of times. And I feel like his efficiency, he was one of the worst players in the association based off true shooting and his overall decision making, sure. But the structure that he was playing in speaks to a big part of that as well. Down the stretch, as he, acquired himself more and more into that bench role, he started to play a lot more composed and controlled basketball. And again, this is his first year not playing for the same organization that had a top 5 player on it. So now he's carving out his own role. He's getting used to seeing different types of coverages, and he's still super duper young. I think next year could pay a lot of big dividends for Poole, especially with where this Washington team is trying to go. So I'm not mad at anything you said. I think all of those things make sense. I guess my next question would be, before Poole got there, I kept saying the best player on this team is still going to probably be Kyle Kuzma. And I think last year, Kuzma had a pretty solid year. His passing overall got better. His shots were there, but he was dangled around in terms of trade rumors and whatnot. As someone that covers his team, do you believe that Kuzma is a trade rumor guy for you by this deadline? Or do you think that the Wizards are going to try to keep him in the same role he's in right now?
It's a great question. It's one that has been discussed, honestly, ever since he got here in the Russell Westbrook trade. The Russell Westbrook trade was a phenomenal trade for the Wizards. A guy that didn't want to be here in D.C., and yet Kuzma, KCP, Montrezl Harrell, eventually Aaron Holiday, a 22nd overall pick. Like, you get a good package, and he's the last remaining player from that team. I mean, they even used that pick to draft Isaiah Todd, and he was gone way before Kyle was gone. But he's been in rumors, and the reason he's in so many rumors is because he's so perfect for so many teams. I mean, how many teams need a 3-and-D wing that can knock down a three, can play defense if he wants to? Like, he's the perfect trade deadline piece, which is why I thought, I mean, you saw Dallas wanted him at the deadline last year, but he didn't want to leave, so the Wizards didn't trade him. I've always seen Sacramento as a team, especially because they had a deal in place before the Wizards had a deal for Kuzma. That was pretty much official until last minute. Russell Westbrook said, I want to come here and I want to work this out between LA and the Wizards. So I see Sacramento as a team. The Lakers always make sense just because, I mean, you trade someone away, you clearly drafted him, you have a like for him. He knows people like AD and Bron. He wanted a ring there. There's a couple of moves like that, but the best part about it is his contract. I mean, it's ascending value. So, for a guy like me that didn't want to pay Kyle when he left or when he had a free agency last offseason, he was expected to get 4 years, $120 million. That's $30 million a year. He basically got 4 years, $90 million, with some extra in bonuses and stuff. So I guess 4 years, like $95 to $100 million. That's nothing. And when you think about it, he made $30 million this first year and then dropped down to around 25 the next year. And these next 2 seasons of Kyle Kuzma are $22 million and $18 million. That is
in this current cap, that's not even a whole lot, right?
That's like a glorified 6th man or like your 4th or 5th starter for a guy that is the Wizards' best player, as you mentioned. So, like, number one, that's a great contract. And for teams that are battling this new second apron, it's not easy to discuss deals. I mean, if you're a second apron team, you can't bring in more salary than you send out in a trade. And with a lot of these teams like Phoenix, LA, like these teams need to make moves, and they can't trade for another guy if he's making $30 million a year. So Kyle Kuzma is a great fit and is on a good contract. He's perfect. So he's always going to be in trade rumors. The reason I don't think he's been moved is I think he wants to be a number one option. I think he wants to be in DC. He wants to be a guy that's rebuilt around, but I don't think he is. And I've not been shy in saying that because I think he's a great player. But at the same time, you can be a great player in your role, but sometimes your role is extended too far. It's stretched out too far. And in Kyle Kuzma's scenario, he's a 3rd option, maybe a 4th option, like you saw with the Lakers on a title team. And the Wizards are using him as a number 1, which makes no sense. And is why it ultimately seems like a trade is inevitable. I mean, I'd prefer to move him. I don't think the Wizards need to, but I think they should explore it. There's a bunch of trade packages, and we could get into a bunch of them. I did a pod 3 weeks ago, and I
Mm-hmm.
literally did 40 minutes of just discussing 3 or 4 trade packages around Kyle Kuzma that make sense for not only the Wizards and not only for Kuz, but for the other teams as well, because his contract's great, because he's a great fit on so many teams. So I think he's always going to be in trade rumors with contract and with fit. I mean, if the Wizards haven't traded him now, I don't see them really making a move unless somebody comes in and gives them 2 firsts, because they've held out for 2 years now. They want 2 firsts, they want salary filler, and they're only getting 1. So we'll see how it unfolds in February.
I love your point as well about the timing of Kyle Kuzma on this roster, right? The new CBA is such a critical thing that more NBA fans need to become hip to, because that is impacting the moves that these teams are trying to make. A lot of teams are either dumping salary or not taking on bad contracts because of what that second apron does to teams. And this, to me, is a perfect segue to a player that I really, really wanted to discuss. What the Wizards did with Deni was a very interesting thing to me, because I thought Deni had a ton of value. I thought he was one of the more valuable assets, because, again, I never felt like his role was ever truly realized for what it could have been in DC. Unfortunately, he was there for the time where it was Russ and Beal, and he was more so like a third guy who didn't really have like the ball in his hands more. Unfortunately, he's gone now, but I thought that like assets like those really mattered in the upcoming CBA. And even though Deni's gone, I think the next guy that DC has to think about now is really Corey Kispert, which you touched on briefly in your podcast and whatnot. I wanted to get your thoughts about Deni's departure, but more importantly, what do you think the Wizards are going to come to in terms of paying Corey Kispert or not?
Yeah, so look, with Deni, I mean, if you follow me, I was on my way to a draft with my guy Troy Halliburton, and I mean, I was with my brother in a McDonald's, and I got the notification that he got traded. And there's so many fake accounts now, so like I didn't think it was real. Honestly,
Yeah.
apart from Bilal, I thought Deni was the farthest player on this team from being traded. So I went on. I tweeted out, no way. Like I didn't have words to formulate the reaction, because it's shocking. Nobody thought this would happen. It's all under wraps, and not the Wizards like that right now, especially because they aren't that good. So you don't have your Woj and your Shams or anything like leaking about, okay, he might be traded. It's kind of pretty silent. So it comes out of left field. So I was very shocked about it. But then you take a step back and you realize where the Wizards are in their rebuild, what they're trying to accomplish, what they got in return. And it doesn't make it like perfectly okay. I didn't want to move him. He's 23. He had his breakout season that we would all been hoping for. It's like you wait so long for some guy that everyone says is a bust to finally flourish. And then he finally flourishes. He proves you guys right. And then you move him. That sucks as a fan's perspective. It sucks for a fan base that has kind of grown with Deni. But you got Bub Carrington. And when they traded for the 14th pick, it was reported that they worked Bub Carrington out literally the day before. And that's the thing he did the year before with Bilal Coulibaly. So even at that point, I tweeted it out as well. It was like, they're going to take Bub Carrington at 14. They're going to be there. And what made me feel better about the Deni trade is they all basically, you get a really that Bub Carrington is what the package is around. And for you to trade a 23-year-old Deni Avdija coming off a breakout season, receiving most improved player votes, to trade that guy on a very contract for an unknown 18-year-old point guard, that speaks volumes to how much they like Bub Carrington. So obviously you're disappointed in trading Deni, and more excited about Bub, because if you're going to move Deni Avdija, if you're going to make a big drastic change, you have to be confident in what you're bringing in. And for them to do that made me feel better. So moving off of that onto Corey, it's a very similar situation. Drafted only 1 year after Deni, 15th pick in 2021. In the beginning, he was a shooter, and that's all he was, bad defender. And he's still not that great of a defender, but he's okay on that end, and he's lights out shooting the ball. And even in a down year last year, numbers-wise, because he struggled to start the year, I mean, February until April, he couldn't miss. He was arguably the most consistent Wizard from February to April. played pretty much every game, wasn't hurt, knocked down threes, held his own on defense. He's the perfect player for a contender. And that's kind of what makes me nervous because I want to keep him here. But we're rebuilding. And if you can trade a 23-year-old Deni Avdija, you can trade a 25-year-old Corey Kispert like that. Like it's nothing.
Yeah.
And I mean, you mentioned the contract. They didn't get one done with Deni until 2 days before the season last year. So I think they're going to wait. I'd like to extend him. It doesn't hurt. I mean, if you're going to trade him, extension or not, it doesn't make much of a difference. And some teams might like that he has 4 years on a cheap deal that they can kind of retain. It's not just like a one and done type thing. So I think 4 years, 40 to 44 million, maybe 10 to 11 per year. I feel like that's fair. But I don't know if Corey Kispert will think it's fair. Maybe he wants to prove himself. So we'll have to see if he bets on himself or if the contract's there on the table and he takes it.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, me personally, as someone who like really watches basketball, to see Deni Avdija be flipped for not really much value, it hurt me because I'm like, he's starting to figure it out. Like this feel like the right timing for this guy to get more reps in DC. I thought he was going to be a big piece of this overall season, and for him to be gone hurts. But I really would hope that this team doesn't make the same error with Corey Kispert, because in my mind, if you're going to go the Alex Sarr route, Corey Kispert is the perfect guy to fit his play style, right? Like having another shooter on the wing who can be a neutral defender at times matters in this type of build. Also, Corey Kispert isn't like 29, 30 years old. He's still a younger asset who can get better and maybe become even better at other aspects of the game. So to me, there's no pain in keeping a player like that. I also don't think that trading him is going to get them some crazy value where it's like, oh yeah, you have to trade him. I don't think his value is going to be that high. So to me, the biggest return would be keeping him and learning from, the Deni trade. Because I think Deni is going to look good in Portland based off what his skill set is, right? So Corey to me is just such a striking player to fit amongst your number 2 pick within Alex Sarr, which people have polarizing views about. I want to be clear. I don't care about Summer League. I'll just be real with you, right? I think Summer League is the first time that you experience basketball. There's some things that translate from that, but no one is defined by their play. It's all about what you do in the season at the beginning all the way through. And I think Alex Sarr is going to look a lot better in the regular season than what he did all over throughout this Summer League. What do you think about him, though?
I'd agree. I mean, it's tough to talk about just because you have a guy highest. The Wizards hadn't had a pick in the top 2 since John Wall in 2010, and I mean John Wall was everything and more. He single-handedly resurrected this franchise from one of the most irrelevant teams in the league to a team that was basically a Kelly Olynyk masterpiece performance away from reaching the conference final. And unfortunately, injuries happened to both him and Brad and Otto Porter and Markieff Morris, and a lot of things happened to where those teams didn't succeed. But when you come into a team like DC, into Washington, that's just a team hungry for something. The Wizards haven't made the conference finals since 1979. Like, I could live my life 2 times over to this point, and I still wouldn't be alive long enough to see the Wizards be in the conference final. So it's tough. Obviously, people in DC and Wizards fans want instant success. But like I said with the Deni trade, it signals how long this is going to take. It signals how tough it's going to be because, I mean, you have a 23-year-old and he's too old for you. He's past where you want him in this rebuild. And so for a guy like Alex Sarr, 19 years old, my biggest thing is you drafted him for defense. You drafted him because he's an elite rim protector. He has great size and length. He does it all pretty much. He can guard 1 through 5, and he's not he's not gonna lock down guards, but he can switch. If you watch Summer League, one of the games that the Wizards won, he had a game-winning block because he stuck with the guard that he switched onto. That's why they drafted him. If you watched Will Dawkins, GM of the Wizards, his press conference after the draft, his first thing about why they took Sarr was just defense. When they interviewed Alex Sarr, what is your best trait? Defense. The defense was there, and that's kind of what makes me feel better because I can't sit here and tell you that the offense wasn't terrible. It was probably worse than terrible. It was non-existent. I mean, he shot a couple threes, and I think maybe he made one, but everything else was a brick. Mid-range game pretty much non-existent. Post game non-existent. So that sucks to watch. But if you watched an ounce of any type of real draft coverage, or if you watched any Alex Sarr games in the NBL, you would understand this is like expected. Maybe like not as bad as he played, but he wasn't supposed to come out here and drop 25 points. So he held his own on defense. He had a very bad summer league on offense. But I will say, like, the polarizing effects of summer league, like you said, I agree with you. I don't think summer league means much. I think you're probably seeing these guys at their very worst, especially when they're first entering the league. I mean, I give you a guy like Cam Whitmore. He absolutely went off one of these games in summer league. He had like 31 points. The next game he came out, he was 0 of 15. He had no points. And I had a bunch of people, Rockets fans in my mentions, telling me, you guys drafted Bilal Coulibaly over this guy, and he just dropped 31. And then they're silent when he goes 0 of 15 because he's an inconsistent player, and he is what he is. So if you're going to take Summer League and you're going to say, okay, Reed Shepherd is the best player in this draft because he was probably the best player in Summer League. Alex Sarr sucks. Go for it, but you're going to look stupid in a couple of years when some of these takes don't fly. Some of these takes are just bad takes. It's 5 games. He wasn't good. I'm not going to come out here and say he was good, but there's no panic here. He's a great defensive player. The offense will come. He's got like 4 or 5 years before he actually plays meaningful basketball. So that should be a lot of time to get in the gym and figure out some post hooks and figure out some inside games. So obviously it wasn't great, but there's no panic here.
That's kind of how I feel. Like, I feel like younger players when they're coming in, especially when you're 18 years old or even 19 years old, there's such a learning curve to the NBA game at the adult level with so many like physical profiles, superstar players every night. You know, like there's a learning curve to that. And I feel like for young players, those first 4 years of your career is you just trying to stay above water in a tough and competitive league. I think after that, we then get to see, okay, after these first 3 to 4 years, now what is the player you're going to become? I think Sarr had a extremely rough offensive game for sure for the entire summer league. Yes. However, that's not why he was drafted. He wasn't drafted to be this offensive hub. No, he was drafted for the defensive floor that they hope that he can establish. And maybe in the next draft, you can draft that guy, right? I think this is a piece to put them in the right position to establish a guy that can be a part of your core in terms of development. Right now, for teams that are going through a massive rebuild, the number one thing is getting minutes to your young players so they can develop and show you if they can be pieces of the core or assets to flip to get that guy, right? That should be your focus. And to me, Alex Sarr drafting him was no deviation from that.
I would agree. And look, I don't think any Wizards fans really even came out and tried to defend it. Like, it is what it is. He was really bad. But I think a saving grace was Bob Carrington. I think he was all Summer League second team. He was phenomenal. Yeah. Commanded the floor. So that made Wizards fans feel a lot better. And even a guy like Keyshawn George, like drafted to be a 3-and-D, and he was as advertised. Very good. I think he shot 54% maybe from 3, 52% from 3 in Summer League on a decent volume of attempts. Was able to play kind of 1 through 4 on defense. So everything else was great. The guy that really everyone came to watch wasn't. But again, you traded Deni Avdija. He was 23. He was too old. This is going to take so much time. So if you're going to jump off the ship now, like, why? It's going to take a while. He's going to develop. If you thought Alex Sarr would come out here and be Anthony Davis or Jaren Jackson Jr., you're delusional. And even a guy like Reed Shepherd, he had a great summer league. Reed Shepherd's going to be 10 times the player at this time in 2 or 3 years as well. Different people just develop at different paces. Giannis Antetokounmpo, I'm sure, was called a bust hundreds and hundreds of times throughout his first couple years. He didn't get into where he is now until maybe like his 4th or 5th year in the league. So it takes time. Some people just develop at a different pace, so there's no panic.
Yeah, and that's the most critical part about understanding what a rebuild is, because you have so many people who have like this microwave thought where it's like, no, like two pick, you guys look good right now. Rebuilds take multiple years. There are some teams, and by the way, as a native Detroiter, there are some teams that take a very long time to figure out the rebuild, right? Where you don't get the draft picks right and you have to kind of rebound from that and see what your next pivot point is. I think they are in year one of their official rebuild. This is going to be year two by Bilal, who to me is still a very intriguing player. We knew coming in he was going to be a rough prospect just in terms of how young he was, but in terms of the defender he is, that's translated. I think he's still a pretty good defensive player, but really figuring out the entire piece of the puzzle is what the Wizards are really locked in on. So I want to get your thoughts on Bilal's growth and his role on this Wizards team moving forward.
Yeah, Bilal, I mean, he's quickly becoming, just the best player on this team, and that's because like everyone around him is just getting traded. Every talented player on this team, eventually by the time Bilal is in year 3 or year 4, he's gonna be the longest tenured player on this team. I don't know if Jordan Poole will be here. I highly doubt Kyle Kuzma will be here. And if that's the case, then he's probably the best player on your team. And that's kind of what happens. He was the first draft pick of this current regime with your GM and your president of basketball operations. It's kind of like their baby. Like, this is their guy. They traded up to get him as well. They traded a second round pick with Indiana because Utah was right over their back trying to get him too. And there was a third team trying to bet. So like, he's a very coveted guy. And you saw a lot last year. Bilal struggled to begin the season. He was shooting very well from 3, but every other facet of this game was kind of hard to come by. But the one saving grace was that defense, because in game like 7 or 8, he was switching on to the best player on the opposing team. And then that kind of shifted into he's starting now on the best player. He started on Giannis, started on Kevin Durant. Like he's that guy already as a defender. And the offense isn't great right now. It's going to come around eventually. He's kind of raw. He's very athletic, very good defensively, but again, it's similar to Alex Sarr. Everything else is great apart from the offense, and I'd rather that than just give me someone who could go get me a bucket. Look at Cam Thomas, for example. Cam Thomas absolutely torches some teams. I mean, if you watched him against the Wizards, he dropped, I think, 38. He always kills the Wizards. But there's a reason that Cam Thomas didn't start when the Nets were good. There's a reason Cam Thomas isn't thought of as this unbelievable player. It's because he's not a winning player. He doesn't play defense. All he can do is get you a bucket, and even at that point, he's not making his teammates better. He's not assisting. He's not doing the little things. That's not a guy that I want on my team, because I'm not going to win games with Cam Thomas dropping 38 points. That's not a winning formula, because he did it last year for Brooklyn, and they were terrible. He's going to do it, honestly, at a higher rate for Brooklyn this year, and they're going to be even worse. So I'd rather take my chances with a young guy who can defend, who has very good athleticism, who has the intangibles to develop offense, than a guy that comes into the league as a pure bucket getter, can't play a lick of defense, doesn't honestly want to play a lick of defense, doesn't make his teammates better, and then what do I have? I've got nothing right now to help me win if that's my player. So I think Bilal Coulibaly makes everyone around him better. He's only going to get better, and if you watched him throughout the season, he only got better. The wrist injury, he broke his wrist in Chicago in, I think, late March. So that sucked. He missed around the last couple games of the season, but he won a silver medal in France. He was, he played a lot in their qualifying prelim games. He got good experience, and I feel like he's going to come back a little better. Hopefully he can add some weight, get a little stronger, because he's a little skinny right now. Hopefully the 3 improves a little bit, but again, I would take my chances on a guy like Bilal Coulibaly over a guy that can get me a bucket but can't do anything else.
Yeah, I definitely understand that aspect. You're focused on building a winner with a core of players, and these players taking steps to really aid their overall development to do the smaller things. I would say I'm not looking for Bilal to be a 20 points per game guy this year, but more so becoming a better connective passer, understanding better angles when he's trying to attack closeouts off of the catch, getting a better catch and shoot. Like, these are aspects of the game that make you fit better to any type of team. And when you have that portability, when you become that versatile of a player, that is how you impact winning at the highest level, especially when he projects to be a very serious perimeter defender. He had a lot of moments last year where he played very good defense against the elite of the elite at under 21 years old, right? Like, that's what we saw from him. So seeing him continue to take those steps in this next season is pretty important. But that does take me to my next question, which I got to really highlight you and shout you out because you gave NBA Twitter a great tweet for engagement. You asked people, how good do you think the Wizards are going to be blank? And you had so many people, like over 5 million people saw it. They had jokes, tweets, all these things to get off. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I went on like a 20-minute rant on my pod the other day. Obviously it was cool. It got like 8 million views. That's awesome. Like, it doesn't get lost on me. That's really cool. But I think it got views for the wrong reasons. I mean, I wanted to see what people thought of the Wizards. I wanted to see what record they thought they would get. And I thought it would just kind of be confined to Wizards Twitter and my followers. But it got to a darker place of Twitter that is focused on going viral and trying to make money off of Twitter. And I'll tell you right now, if you want to go viral on Twitter, you have to have like 100 million views, because I think I just got paid like $15 for this month, and I had the 8 million view tweet. So you're not making any money off this anyway. So I don't get it.
Yeah, you're not.
But people, it was basically some guy tweeted like the Wizards will go out there and try their best. Like some of the stuff was really funny, but then you had like 45 other people saying they're going to go out there and try their best, trying to go viral. So I think that's kind of the weird thing I thought about, is how much it kind of showed me how much people are desperate to like have a viral tweet, which really doesn't bring you much. But onto the actual side of it, the one thing that pissed me off with that one was all the people in the comments saying, who are these guys in relation to the 3 Wizards draft picks? Because like, if you're an actual NBA fan, you're going to know who the most recent number 2 overall pick is. You should know Bob Carrington, who a lesser known college player, but again, if you are an NBA fan, you watch any type of draft coverage, you would know. I don't expect you to know Keyshawn George, underrated player from Miami, late first round pick. That's fine. But to come out here and kind of like embarrass your own self by admitting your ignorance and admitting you don't know any of those players. And honestly, I don't blame it on them. I blame it on the current landscape of the media. I blame it on the fact that if you watched a lick of ESPN draft coverage during this cycle, you turn it on and they're talking about the guy who went 55th overall or 54th, whenever Bronny James went. That
before all these other players. Yep.
And you didn't talk about Alex Sarr once. I mean, they bring on Jonathan Givony on ESPN, who's their draft expert. He would talk about him for like a 5-minute segment. And then they go to Kendrick Perkins, who honestly, if you asked him to talk 1 ounce of content about Alex Sarr, couldn't tell you. Stephen A. Smith knows nothing about any draft prospects except Bronny James. So that was the most frustrating thing. It's like, I don't even blame these people for not knowing anything, because the media is just so focused on who's going to be the guy that gets me clicks and views, who's the most popular name. And so they're not talking about the number 2 overall pick, who most people had as number 1 in Alex Sarr. They're talking about the guy who is going in the 2nd round because his dad is one of the greatest players of all time. So that was the most frustrating thing, because you have all of these fair weather fans that and I'm not saying that all Warriors fans or all Lakers fans or all Celtics fans are like this, but you got a lot of front runners. You have, you got a lot of people that aren't going to be like me, who your team sucks and you're actually staying and you're watching these games. Most of them move on. Most of them take on the team that's going to be winning every time. And because of this, they don't watch the draft. And even if they do watch the draft, they have to sit and watch a bunch of analysts on ESPN who don't know anything about these guys. They just know Bronny James is LeBron's son. We need to talk about him. I don't know who Alex Sarr is, because I don't do my job well, and I don't talk about the guys that people actually should be talking about. So that was the most frustrating thing for me, because like to go out there and say like, who are these guys, trying to be funny, and you don't know who the number 2 pick is, it's an indictment on them, but it's also an indictment on the current landscape of the media, and kind of how they push certain narratives just because it makes more money or generates more revenue than other type of content.
Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head. A lot of people in the NBA Twitter community, and this is a rant, but that's fine. We can do this. A lot of them are not here for basketball. A lot of them are here to be right. A lot of them are here for the numbers. A lot of people are here for the trolls, the memes, and that's fine, right? Like, there's always going to be a crowd or a audience for that. But let's not get too far away from the basketball piece. You don't know who Alex Sarr is? Like, I don't understand these things. And I feel like you're so right in terms of the culture we live in today, right? Because people want, expectations now. They want teams to win now. If they don't, they go elsewhere. They follow their next team. They follow their next player. They're not in it for the long haul. People like you, like you legitimately, and I would watch you on your account. You would ask questions about lineups. You would have tweets for halftimes. You would be in spaces on Twitter talking about players and games, and you lived it every single day. So that way, when your team actually turns a new leaf and these players convert into something, you can remember these moments because you saw it get built right in front of your face. A lot of people don't have the stamina or the willpower to want to be able to go through that, but that's the ebbs and flows of what sports are. For instance, I'm a Warriors fan. My team is in an awkward, place right now, but I'm going to be watching the games. I'm going to still be trying to see what we can do great, even though we're not real contenders, in my opinion. And that's what it's about. Like, basketball has so many different layers to it. It's not all about just who's winning. It's about who's getting better, who's going to become the next best player in the league, who is going to be a valuable rotation player, who's the best contract in the league. There's just so many ebbs and flows to the game, and to just meme your way out of it and throw your way out of it isn't really productive to the main basketball cycle that we take in. I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, to speak on that point, it's the thing I would say is, like, I'm not telling anybody to be like me. I'm not telling anybody to be like lunatic like that and watch all 82 games of a team that wins 15. Like, I'm not going to get on you if you're a Wizards fan and you watched 40 games this season, or if you watched less than that. I understand it, and I'm not saying that everybody needs to be like me. Even when people's teams are good, that doesn't mean that they watch every game. They have lives, they have other stuff to do. But at the same time, and it might be a personal thing, but I don't get how you can find joy in watching your team succeed if you weren't there for the times where your team struggled. Like, if you didn't go through the struggle of your team rebuilding or your team going through a rough patch, I don't understand how you can enact any joy. Like, imagine I just hopped on the Celtics bandwagon this season.
Yeah.
They won a ring. I would be like, I'd give my dad a high five. I'd be like, awesome, that's cool. If the Wizards were in a ring, and I've said this on record, like, I would cry. And I would only cry because I have watched every game since 2014. I have watched this team self-destruct so many times. I've watched this team invent new ways to lose when they were trying to win. I've seen this team win 15 games in an 82-game season. Like, these are all things that are going to make it that much more special when they win. Versus if you're just jumping team to team, whoever's good, whoever's bad. And this is what I say all the time about LeBron fans. Like, people that are fans of individual players, like, by all means, go for it, whatever you like, but that's something I never understood. Like, you're a fan of, I'm not going to get into the MJ versus LeBron thing, but one of, if not the best players of all time, a guy that made, I think, 8 straight NBA finals. Like, You're always going to be good. You're always going to be right there. How is that fun? Like, you're a Cleveland fan, he leaves. Then you're a Heat fan, he wins 2 rings. And then you go right back to Cleveland, just like that. You were a Heat fan for 4 years, and now you're a Cavs fan. And now you got to adopt a new team just because you're following this guy. He wins a ring in Cleveland, and then he goes over to the Lakers, and he wins a ring there. It's like, you're always going to be in contention, whereas I would rather be on a team that might suck, but I feel more rewarded when they actually do well. And I know that's probably a hot take, but it's my feelings on that matter.
Greg, I respect it. I really do. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be in the same type of overall situation. For me, I began watching basketball in 2013, but that was because I was always into playing sports and not watching them. I just wasn't used to, at all watching them. And then my friends were like, you should watch it. And then I began watching. I'm like, okay, I like this team. I'm going to follow that team. And now, several years later, I'm at an impasse now where, in the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to be doing our own Golden State rebuild as well. And I'm going to be here. But that does really take me to my question, because we saw the ESPN predictions about the Wizards and whatnot. Do you think this team is winning more than 15 games this season? And if not, where do you think the draft could potentially get them in terms of the best players to really shape this franchise beyond Alex Sarr and number 2?
I would say they're going to be better. I'm also on record saying that 24.5 wins last season was a very disrespectful line, and they won 10 less games. So I wouldn't take anything that I say at any type of face value. But they did add some things. I mean, they lost Daniel Gafford at the deadline last year, brought in Marvin Bagley, So like they didn't really do much in terms of their roster. They lost Tyus Jones in this offseason, brought in 3 really solid draft picks, and they made some really smart free agent signings on good contracts as well. I mean, a guy like Jonas Valanciunas, 3 years, $10 million, one of the
Valid.
most consistent
Very valid.
centers of the last decade, pretty much. A guy that the Lakers had #1 on their free agency signing list came to DC, and for a team like the Wizards that have struggled to rebound the ball for forever, he's going to come in here and kind of solidify the paint. Not as good of a rim protector as Gafford, but can body up to other guys like Embiid and bigger centers that Gafford struggled against. You bring in a guy like Saddiq Bey, who I don't think is going to play this year. I think he's going to probably just rehab. But again, a young guy, if he does come back, that's a very good shooter. That's a very solid defender. It's a very good player. And you couple that with Jordan Poole in year 2 as a starting point guard. You still have Kyle Kuzma. You have Bilal Coulibaly in year 2. Like, this team, this roster is potentially the worst in the league, and I get that. But I think they're a little bit better entering this year than last year. Again, I called it year 0. You had really bad veterans that you brought over from big-time trades in KP and Beal. You brought in guys like Gallinari, Muscala, Landry Shamet. Like, not great players, but you had to play them. Whereas this year, you got a bunch of young guys that you're going to play, and the veterans you're playing are Jordan Poole, Kyle Kuzma, Jonas Valanciunas. Like, it's not any washed up veterans. They're good players. So I think they're going to be better, but I also think a lot of them are going to be traded. Like, honestly, if you're good, you'll probably be moved by February. That's the shame in a rebuild. So I have them right now, I believe, at 21 wins. And, like, again, I said they'd win 26 games last year. They won 15. So take that what you will. I think they'll go 21-61. But again, I still think they're going to be the worst team in the league. I hope they are the worst team in the league. Like, there's no incentive of being the second or third worst. It's better, honestly, at this spot to bottom out, because you want Cooper Flagg, you want Ace Bailey, like, you want these guys. So the worse they are, the better. But I have them at 21-61.
Okay, yeah, I don't think that's a bad range. I feel like I 100% agree with you in terms of how this team got better. Valanciunas is a guy that to me, if you're trying to contend for a title, I have a couple problems with his game defensively. But in terms of being a rotation player, period, in the league, he has value. We've seen that multiple times. Even for that Pelicans team, he showed value there too all throughout the regular season. So having him in that role as a rebounder, I also think he'll probably have more of a bigger leash to do more things based on the team that he's on. And as a veteran player, I think he could teach a lot of valuable things to Sarr, who's a player that, obviously trying to build up for the future. So I like his role. Do you think he might start, or do you think he's going to be off the bench?
Well, before I start, I fully agree with what you just said in terms of, not a rim protecting big isn't going to really protect the paint like that. But if you put him up against like a back to the basket type big, that's kind of where I like him on defense, because Daniel Gafford against Joel Embiid, and that's the best example. It was just like barbecue chicken. It was so easy.
Food.
Back him down. Joel Embiid dropped 50 last year. There was one game where we legitimately started Kyle Kuzma at center on Joel Embiid. So, like, I'm content, honestly, with anything at center, but I'll take Valanciunas. And being a mentor for Sarr is huge as well. It's probably a big reason they brought him in. I think he starts. I think he's by far and away the best center on this roster. I don't really think it's much of a real competition. And then you kind of got to look at, you have Marvin Bagley, who I think is more of a 4 than a 5. So I think he'll be at the 4. I think Alex Sarr will be backing up Kyle Kuzma at the 4. Again, I don't think Alex Sarr is better even than Marvin Bagley. I don't think he's better than Rashawn Holmes. I think those guys are better right now. Obviously, they're not going to be better, hopefully, than Sarr is in a couple of years. But those guys are better now. And I think what the Wizards are going to try to do is, they're going to develop their young guys, but they're going to put the best team on the floor. They've been very adamant about that. The people that are going to help the team win are going to play. They're not going to come out here and try to lose. That's never going to be the case. It just so happens that their roster is so bad that they can put out their best team and still lose a lot of games. But I do think you'll see him start. And, he makes sense as a trade candidate. I mentioned the Lakers really like him. There's a bunch of other teams, Sacramento even, that have needs for maybe backup centers on cheap deals. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's gone by February. And at that point, it's kind of like a seamless transition from your older veteran Valanciunas to Alex Sarr stepping into the front court. Maybe not at center, but maybe in a power forward role. Maybe you go small ball. Maybe you play big and put Kuzma at the 3 and then bring somebody else in at the 5. But again, I've seen a lot of people upset that I don't think Alex Sarr is going to start. I don't think he's good enough. And that's obviously upsetting to say, but I don't. I think Valanciunas is miles ahead of him. I think he gives the Wizards a better chance to win. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to try to give themselves the best chance to win.
That's interesting. I never thought about it in that way because I felt like Valanciunas was going to be able to show a lot of the knowledge of the game offensively to Sarr, which to me is the biggest thing because Sarr to me is drafted for his defensive value. He's going to learn that and, have that. In terms of offensive value, in terms of like really developing his strength and his post game, that's what I think Valanciunas can offer him that he's not really as well versed in to really, help him out in those spots. I feel like the interesting part of predicting how the Wizards are going to win basketball games or what their record is going to be, what makes it hard is exactly what you said. If you're a good player, more than likely, if you're not on a bad contract, they're going to try to flip you for value to kind of bottom out. Like we've seen some teams where like, yes, you're going to play the best lineups you physically have. Yes. But at the same time, if you have good players, you're going to trade them for worse players to get a higher incentive in the draft moving forward. And as you said, this next draft is a generational draft, right? Like there's many, different players who are looked at to be star caliber players like a Cooper Flagg, like a potential Ace Bailey. To me, if I'm a Wizards fan, I'm really asking myself, who is the guy that we're looking at after this season is over to be a part of that core with Sarr? Who is that to you?
It's Cooper Flagg, and obviously a lot can change. I traditionally like drafting players that went the college route just because it's pretty unknown. I mean, you got guys like LaMelo that go to Australia and they're unbelievable. But you also have guys that come over like your Dante Exums who play overseas, don't play college ball, come into the pros and are really not good. So I prefer that. And look, he's playing at Duke. He's going to be playing a lot of really good competition. Some really hostile environments. So you're going to be able to see if he's like that or not. Not having started the college basketball season, he's the clear-cut number one guy. And I mean, you saw last year, that's what I hate about the new lottery system. You could be like a Hawks team that really, they didn't do it the right way. They are a fringe playing team, don't have any assets because they made a bad trade, don't have any type of rebuild in the process. They're the 9th overall pick and they get up to number 1. So again, the Wizards could be as bad as they want to be. They can go 0-82.
And they still will not guarantee them that first pick. Yeah.
They're still going to have 14% chance. And that's the same as 2 other teams that probably won 20 to 22 games. And then you got a team like the Hawks that can swoop in winning 38 and they can get the first pick over you. The main thing is I think if the Wizards are 1, they can't fall farther than 5. And again, if they're 2, they can't fall farther than 6. So that's the only saving grace of being worse than the other teams. But you got to play to be the worst. You got to play for Cooper Flagg. Again, Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, like these are all really good players. The one guy that I really like is Nolan Traore from
Nolan Traore,
point guard. He's so good, and he's going to be so much better. So if the Wizards don't end up getting lucky and they fall to 4 or 5, maybe even 3, like that's a guy that I really like. That's a guy that I have number 2 on my big board right now, and I know it's early, but that's a guy that I really like. Good speed, really good size, can shoot the ball. Like he has everything as a point guard. And I know we have Jordan Poole, but at the same time, you take best player available. So those are some of the guys I'm looking at. It's a little too early just because like it hasn't started yet, even overseas competition. So you don't know. But that's the annoying thing about being like a fan of a rebuilding team. While most fans are looking at like, okay, who's going to be my competition in the East? Is it Boston? Is it Milwaukee? Like I'm already on Tankathon simulating the lottery. I'm already on draft big boards, and the season hasn't even started. It doesn't start for another month. So that's one of the tough things about being in a rebuild. It's like you're on Tankathon going through lottery simulations in September, and the draft isn't even until June. They haven't even played a game. So that's tough.
Yep. Yeah, I couldn't 100% understand the ailment of that. I'm kind of in a similar situation. Obviously, my team's not where the Wizards are, but I don't view this team right now as a real contender. But the season's coming pretty soon. There's arguments for them to be a better team than they were last year as well. But we're kind of just like waiting to see what happens and what the shift in the team is, if the team can get better with young players having leaps. These things kind of matter. So I 100% feel you on that. I'm interested to see what happens with the Wizards. I will be watching games on this year. I actually have a game I'll be going to in Detroit as well versus the Wizards this season. So I'll be monitoring it. And I'm hoping that Poole can have a comeback season. I don't think he's as bad as he was overall last year. I think he'll be a much better player. And what that gets you in terms of draft capital or a younger guard who can legitimately turn the corner in DC, it should be fun to watch regardless.
I agree. I mean, I hope you have fun at that Detroit game. I hope it's like a good game. Is it like earlier in the season that you're going to that game?
I believe it's earlier. I forgot which one because they offered me okay. I think 11 games, and I just picked yes, I want to see one of the Jordan Poole or the Alex Sarr, Kuzma, classes. I just want to be able to watch them at least. Yeah.
I only ask because if you went in March, the team would look so much different. You might not get to see some of the cool guys. I mean,
true.
Be a lot of the younger guys. So it's nice that you'll get to see their roster with some of these veterans, and maybe it's a competitive game. But yeah, I'm going to try to go to some of my own. It's always cool. I mean, look, the Wizards open up the season at home against Boston. It's honestly going to be 50-50 maybe. Honestly, might be more Celtics fans there. But again, the Wizards are the worst team in the league. They really haven't. This happens all the time, even when they're good. So again, it's not like the Warriors where you have arguably the best home environment in the league. It's a lot different, but it's still fun. And when you're rebuilding, you kind of got to make the most of it. So
true. Well, Greg, I really appreciate us doubling back for another Wizards EP. First off, your podcast is extremely inquisitive. I feel like you get to a lot of things with your team. It helps a lot. And I'm telling y'all, man, give Greg a follow on Twitter. He really breaks down Wizards hoops all throughout the season. I'll be seeing you on the TL. Much in-depth conversation we had as well. We touched on the contract situation with Corey Kispert, the new draft guys, how to perform, Jordan Poole, Kyle Kuzma. We touched on a lot of aspects of Wizards basketball, and that's exactly what I like to do, and your ball. So really appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I told you this last time, it's always the most fun pod I do with the cycle. And I was looking forward to it when I did it this year, and I'm looking forward to it if you have me back to do it again next year, because it's
absolutely
you curate the conversation. You have really good questions, and it's just easy for me and you to talk about the team because you're knowledgeable about it as well. You don't just watch the Warriors, you watch the whole league. That's what I like about you and respect about you and your show is it's not just one, and that's kind of an indictment on mine because mine's only Wizards. If you like the Wizards, you're gonna like my show. If you don't, maybe you'll like it. But Gift is about pretty much everything, and he's very knowledgeable and stuff. So that's why I always enjoy coming onto the show. And yeah, I appreciate having me. If you want to find my show, it's again, like I said, it's the Wizards podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, whatever you watch your podcast on. And yeah, I again appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. All of his links will be in the description box below. If you want to catch the audio version of this podcast, that will also be in the description box below. We also touched on Johnny Davis very briefly. He looked better towards the tail end of the season, but we'll see overall improvements from him and the entire team moving forward next year. But again, Greg, very much appreciative of your time. And we don't have too long until we're out of the dead season. Training camp begins this month. We'll have some new content and things coming up. I'm sure that you will be very aggressive in your pursuit of that basketball content for the Wizards coming up. So much appreciated. Have a good one, people. I'll catch you on the next pod. Peace out.